So it looks like the way that we manage these feats of causal chaining is that we have these macroscopic structures, and a very simple one is to imagine the idea of a restaurant. So it seems like in our minds, anyone who's been, gone to a lot of restaurants has a package of information about restaurants, um, which allows them to do something like this very easily. So without even working hard. So if you imagine a simple, again, it's sort of, simple-minded story. Let's say John was hungry. He went to Goldstein's and got a pastrami sandwich. He left $5 on the table when he was done. Well, there's a lot missing in that story, but we can still answer questions about it. So if somebody says, "What is Goldstein's?" we can answer it's a restaurant, or if you're kind of a little more familiar, you might actually say it's a deli restaurant, as they would say in New York. What did John eat? Well, he ate a pastrami sandwich. It doesn't explicitly say that. Who made the sandwich? It doesn't say anything about that, but you can assume there's a chef or a cook at the restaurant. They made the sandwich. Who took John's order? Again, it doesn't say anything about this, but you can assume there's a waiter. So the waiter must have taken John's order. Who served John the sandwich? Also the waiter. Why did John put $5 on the table? Well, he probably was leaving a tip for the waiter, right? Because that's something that happens at restaurants. So the fact we can answer all these questions that aren't in the input sort of implies that we have a kind of big structure lurking. And, that structure probably consists of a lot of things. It consists of probably some visual, some understanding of what restaurants look like and how things function and so on. But one of the key things is what's often called a script. So a script is essentially a ready-made causal chain that is the standard causal chain for a restaurant. It looks something like this on the left. That you want food, so you go to the restaurant, you enter the restaurant, you check in with the host or hostess, you're seated by them, you read the menu, you order, you get food, you eat the food, you get the bill, you pay the bill, you leave a tip, you leave. And, that's essentially a sort of standard, simple restaurant experience. If you went to a fancy restaurant, it's much more complicated than that. But, you've got sommeliers and amuse-bouches and all kinds of stuff. But, even the simple one's pretty complicated. And so it looks like what happens is, when you get some input, when you get the simple restaurant story, it evokes this restaurant schema with its script, and you sort of have a ready-made causal chain that you fill in. So the story you actually encode in your mind is not just what you heard; it's the whole causal chain it's the whole script. So it ends up something like this: John was hungry. He went to Goldstein's. He went inside Goldstein's. He asked the host for a table, maybe a table for one. Host led him to a table. He sat down. He looked at the menu, decided what he wanted. He ordered a pastrami sandwich. The waiter brought the sandwich. John ate the sandwich. The waiter brought John the bill for the sandwich. John paid for the sandwich. John left the tip for $5 on the table. John left the restaurant. Now, sort of what evidence do we have that this is actually what goes on? Well, it turns out if you tell someone a simple story like this, and then you test them to find out what they think they were told, they can't remember whether they were told something or it was just in the script. So if you tested somebody the next day after you told them the story, said, "Well, were you told explicitly that a waiter took the order?" They won't remember. They'll say, "Well, I might have been told that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I was told that by the person telling me the story or whether I just inferred that, from my standard restaurant schema." So there's very strong evidence that the way you remember something is not simply to remember the encoding of its input. You remember the whole causal chain that you build with the help of something like a restaurant schema, in order to represent that, and to the point where you can't even keep track of how you heard it. In fact, you can't keep track also of whether you were told something or saw it. So if you watch a movie, people can't remember reliably what they heard in dialogue versus what they saw for themselves, and that's because that's very strong evidence for the language of thought hypothesis, the idea that input comes in, it gets encoded in an internal language, and that becomes your representation of the facts of the case, and you sort of lose the connection back to the original input.